Hello everyone. Today we're going to talk about how to make a quote sandwich. If you're watching this video, I'm going to assume that you've read the homework, which was They Say, I Say, Chapter 4. If you haven't read that yet, please stop the video, read the chapter, and come back when you're done. So, what exactly is a quote sandwich, and why would you want to make one? What a quote sandwich is a technique to help you integrate quotes into your paper. It's got 3 parts, 2 pieces of bread and meat in the middle. The first piece of bread is an introduction that you write for the quote you're about to use. The second piece is the meat, the quote itself. And the second piece of bread is your response to the quote. Together, these 3 pieces make up the quote sandwich. What I'm going to do for the rest of this video is I'm going to break each one of them down so that you understand how to make a successful quote sandwich that you can include in your essay. So, let's talk about the first piece of bread. The first piece of bread is where you prepare your audience for what they are about to read in the quote you chose. I'm assuming that since you chose this quote, it is relevant and it is interesting and you've got something to say about it. But in order for your audience to understand the quote and your response to it, you're going to have to lay a little bit of groundwork first. And that's what this first piece of bread does. It might do one or more of these things to lay that groundwork. It might give some context that your audience is going to need in order to understand what the quote says. You might talk about the circumstances under which the quote was spoken or written. You might talk about how long ago the quote was spoken or written. And you might talk about what was the author saying up to the point where he or she used the quote that you are about to use. So, the next thing that you might do is mention the author of the quote. That is particularly important if the author has some sort of special credential that makes this quote especially noteworthy. For example, if you are researching students with autism and you find an essay that was written by an autistic student about his or her experiences in the education system, you might want to let your readers know before you use the quote that they're about to read a quote from someone with life experience in your topic. The same thing goes if you are about to use a quote from someone who is an eminent researcher in their field and has made new discoveries in their field. Let us know that we're about to hear from someone whose ideas are really worth listening to. Finally, if your quote is an example of something that you were just talking about and you're using a quote to prove it, let us know that. Connect your quote using transition words back to previous points you already made, if that connection exists. So, once you've set your reader up with your first piece of bread, you're ready to do the meat of the sandwich. That's where you actually use the quote. Once again, your quote should be relevant to the surrounding paragraph, and it should be correctly cited with an in-text citation. That means that you should either name the author in a signal phrase leading up to the quote or in parentheses after the quote. Now, I say author, but sometimes articles and videos are anonymous and you don't know who the author was. In that case, you use the title. MLA is complicated, I know, so if you have questions about this, please look at the Purdue OWL website that's linked on the class website. Look at your handbook, and if those two don't answer your questions, talk to me or one of the library staff, and we would be happy to help you. So, the other thing you need to remember about the meat of your quote is that you need to have quotation marks at the beginning and the end of every single word-for-word quote that you use. If you've done all of that, then the meat of your quote is complete. Now it's on to your second piece of bread, This is the most important part of your quote sandwich. You've laid the groundwork in your introduction, you've used the quote, and now you get to respond to it and tell your reader what you think about what's going on in that quote. So here are some things that you might do. If your quote is particularly difficult, or if you think that your quote is introducing a concept your readers are going to be completely unfamiliar with, you might attempt to interpret it or explain it in simpler terms that your reader can understand. Now, you don't want to simply reword the quote here, but if you think some interpretation is needed, go ahead and do that. The next thing that you might do is agree or disagree with an opinion that is put forward in the quote. Remember, according to the They Say, I Say chapter we read, if you agree or disagree, you must also explain why you agree or why you disagree. The next thing that you might do is offer an example that illustrates the point in the quote. So, in this essay, I'm allowing you to use personal experience. This is a great way for you to respond to a quote. If you have personal experience with the issues that are going on in the quote that you use, include them in your response and discuss how does what was said in the quote relate to your experience of these issues. And the next thing that you might do is use transition words in order to connect the quote to the next point, if there is some sort of connection between them. If you're moving on to a completely new topic, you don't have to do that. So, we are now finished with the quote sandwich. And what we're going to do next is we're going to look at an example. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some time to pause and read the entire example. You'll probably notice that this is from the essay that we read last week. It was called More Representation for LGBT People of Color. And if you've lost your copy, it is linked on the course website. So go ahead and pause and read the quote sandwich. Okay, now that you've read it, let me point out some things about this quote sandwich. First of all, I've color-coded it for you. This green part is the first piece of bread that introduces the article and summarizes what the journalist's point was up until the part where the quote starts. Notice how it seamlessly fits in with the grammar of the sentence. We talked about that in class. There's a quote mark where it begins and a quote mark where it ends that marks off all word for word quote use. The author's last name is in parentheses here, and that's going to send me to a works cited page that's going to have Hannah listed as the last name of one of my authors. So that's the meat of this quote sandwich. And the rest of it, the red and black part, are all that second piece of bread. Remember how I said the second piece of bread is the most important part, and the length should reflect that. In this case, there is a template from page 64 of They Say, I Say that is responding to this quote with agreement and explaining why the author agrees. And then what happens in this black portion is that the agreement is explained some more. It isn't just explained with one sentence, it is explained with two. So you don't want to stop, is what I'm trying to say, after you have just one sentence explaining your agreement. Remember our metaphor of unpacking the box. Every sentence contains the 3 or 4 sentences after it. You just have to know where to look. So when you're doing your quote sandwiches, make sure that you unpack the box like we talked about in class. So, now that you know about quote sandwiches, here's what you need to do for the next time we meet in class. We're going to be writing our own quote sandwiches as practice. So you're going to need to bring your They Say, I Say textbook, and you're also going to need to bring a source for the essay that you are currently writing.